Good morning. And on the behalf of the whole ESPON and GTC team, I have a pleasure to welcome you to this event on new geographies. This is the second of our online events dedicated to ESPON thematic action plans. During the ESPON 2030 program, we created thematic action plans as a means to bundle together our research activities, give a certain narrative to our efforts, a focus, and provide territorial evidence which is useful for policymakers, and it provides a holistic way how to address different challenges. Today, we will explore a thematic action plan on new geographies. And this thematic action plan is looking at different types of geographies. You may call them non-standard, but mostly they're emerging due to the recent trends, global trends, and local trends as well. The main aim of the thematic action plan is to develop different types of analysis on development trends and the governance solutions applied in these geographies. And probably what is unique here is distinguishing this from different other efforts is that we have strived to create a platform for providing new innovative territorial data and a platform for discussion. And in this way, we will explore the notion of functional territories probably in a new light. Now the aim in the next 3 hours or so is to discuss the first research findings of our thematic action plan together with our researchers and involved stakeholders. And one session is going to be dedicated specifically to the research outcomes. And during the other session, we will look how this applies to the policy context, and we'll have a discussion with our stakeholders. I'm pretty sure that you have noticed the tantalizing word new in the title of the event. What is old, what is new, I'll let you discover during the event. So there will be plenty of opportunities to interact, so I invite you to ask questions as well. So I do hope you enjoy the session, and stay tuned for our next online events. One is already taking place on the 6th of May, and it will be dedicated to climate neutral territories. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, Erik Glorsen, who is going to lead the discussion today. Erik is head of Paris office of the Spatial Foresight. He is himself a researcher with plenty of experience on territorial issues, working in the past in the University of Geneva and Nordigio, and he also happens to be lead expert of one of our ESPON projects on new geographies. So now to you, Erik.
Thank you very much, Zintis, and warm welcome also from my side to this event. To me, this is really at the heart of what ESPON is about. We're talking about how well-designed, collaborative territorial approaches can help solve the key challenges we are confronted to, such as climate change adaptation, such as transformation of our industries to make them more green, more digital, such as preserving biodiversity, a lot of very big topics. I'm not sure we're going to be able to solve everything in one morning, but we have 3 hours together this morning, so I think we can still go into in-depth discussions. We'll have in-depth discussion here on the set with the panels. We have in-depth discussion involving you as an audience, being able to bring in your inputs. I'll be getting back to that in a few minutes, but very rich and policy relevant then components of this analysis today. What we'll be doing is really taking stock of different ESPON reports or projects. We have one pan-European study on how governance of these new geographies have been developing, what frameworks exist for it, what kind of trends we can see at the levels when we approach Europe from a perspective of new geographies. And then we have 3 targeted analyses, respectively working on the Alpine space, on the Atlantic region, and on the Carpathian region. So different perspectives, complementary perspectives, which will then provide the basis for a rich discussion, I'm sure. What we'd like to look at with our project stakeholders is how functional areas and new geographies can shape our understanding of how governance could be organized, how we can be more effective in policy design, how policies can become more collaborative. We'll focus more specifically on the interplay between soft and hard governance arrangements, and in relation to this, building on these notions, how these notions can help to build a combination of policy arrangement that is more effective. As Intis mentioned, we will organize this event this morning in 2 sessions. The first one is then with building well our research results. We will be introducing new geographies from the Nostalgia project together with Giancarlo Cotella, who I'll introduce in a second. We will be looking at challenges, opportunities, specificities with respect to flows, interlinkages, ecological fragmentation in the 3 spaces that I've mentioned. And this will be leading to a discussion on the added value of macro-regional strategies when addressing these functional interdependencies. How can macro-regional strategies be the game changer in developing effective approaches to functional territories? The second session later this morning will involve stakeholders from these 3 areas, from the 3 macro-regional strategies or initiatives. We will be looking at what type of evidence they need to inform ongoing policy processes. We will ask them about governance solutions that they consider most promising, also considering multi-level governance solutions, so this coordination between different levels of governance. We'd like to ask our stakeholders if they have examples of good practice they would like to highlight in this relation between the macro-regional level and the functional areas. And then together with you, audience, explore the policy priorities they would like to identify in relation to emerging geographies. As I briefly mentioned, this is an interactive workshop. You will have access to a Slido. I think the technical team will now give you the QR code to the Slido, which you can access in 2 ways. I encourage you either to just scan the code that appears now on the screen and use your mobile phone to submit questions. If your mobile phone is just not readily at hand, you can also just go on slido.com and type ESPON on the hashtag. You'll get a field where you can type ESPON, and then you also have access to the Slido through your computer. So different ways of accessing Slido. It is open throughout the entire event, so please feel free to submit your comments, questions at any time. And also, when you see questions, comments popping up on the Slido screen, you can vote for them. If you think something is very relevant, if you'd like really this question to be submitted to us here on the set, you can also vote for it. So convey to us the importance you associate to specific points that's being raised. I'm joined today by a series of eminent speakers. I would like to do an introduction round. To my left, I have Katarzyna Woźnar, who is assistant professor at Euroreg University of Warsaw. She has a PhD in earth sciences and a strong interdisciplinary background. Dr. Woźnar is a leading researcher in urban studies. She has worked on co-working spaces, on spatial dynamics, on urban resilience, and she's here in her capacity of project leader for ESPON Carpat project. She has also been the ESPON contact point for a number of years, 2007, 2014, so a long established track record in ESPON. And her work bridges economic geography, public policy, innovation, and we're thrilled to have her insights on Carpathian cooperation today. Welcome. We also have Alexandre Almeida with us today. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Porto and did his postdoctoral research in Brazil. Alexandre is currently managing partner at Technopolis Group, Portugal and Brazil, and he has previously held a number of leading positions in the implementation of cohesion policy in Portugal. Alexandre is also a member of the DG Regio high-level expert group on smart specialization, and is with us today as the leader of the project on the Atlantic region, so the ESPON project, ongoing ESPON project. Welcome, Alexandre. To my right, I have Professor Tobias Schiller, who is then professor at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Bavaria. His research focuses on regional development, particularly with focus on the Alpine space and on border areas. Tobias Schiller and his team have specialized in innovative mapping approaches and socioeconomic analysis of complex data. He has been involved in many ESPON projects. We've had the pleasure of working together on ESPON ACT area a few years ago. And he is currently coordinates the Interalp project, which was just closed, and he will present results from the Interalp project. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Giancarlo Cotella, also a full professor of spatial planning at Politecnico di Torino. He has more than 20 years experience in comparative spatial planning research. He has been involved in many ESPON projects, Interalp, Terrace, Urdeco, Metro, Super, Compass, so also established track record in ESPON. He recently edited the book, Spatial Planning Systems in Europe, Comparisons and Trajectories, together with Vincent Nadine and Peter Schmidt, and the Handbook of Territorial Governance with Umberto Giannin Rivolin. Since 2023, he serves as Secretary General of ESOP, the Association of European Schools of Planning. Welcome, Giancarlo. So, Giancarlo, you are here today as project partner for the ESPON Nostalgia project with specific responsibility for governance analysis across Europe. So I'd like to know if you can help us frame the notion of new and non-standard geographies more generally across Europe. What is it? How can we approach it analytically, these notions? And what factors drive them? What generates these kind of new? Why do we feel the need to invoke these notions now? And then I look forward to hearing more about how the governance approaches can be approached in a pan-European perspective. How can you actually synthesize, approach these novel approaches, a bit fuzzy maybe notions, in terms of their governance and the governance frameworks across Europe? So Giancarlo, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Eric, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and to report some findings from this Nostalgia project that was about the territorial governance of non-standard geographies. As such, it was a very fuzzy project, and it was very much of an exploratory nature. To start reflecting on what non-standard geographies are, I think we should start to differentiate a bit between standard and non-standard geographies. And with standard geography, I think we mean those geographies that we can handle within traditional administrative boundaries. So it is a known path, known territory. Then we have the non-standard geographies that are the one that we try to explore within the project. And here we have basically those geographies that are of more functional nature. It means that they are function of some trends that do not follow the traditional administrative boundaries. And some of them are quite known. We talk since decades about functional urban area, labor market area. And we decided in the project that we are not going to tackle those that are like the usual suspect. We are going much more to explore, and then what we did, those geographies that are new and emerging. It means, as a logic, that there are some emerging trends that have an impact on interlinkages and relation on territories, and they manifest according to functional dynamics that perimeter and delimitate geographies that are non-standard in their essence. And this is what we try to explore in the Nostalgia project. And we didn't know what those geographies were in the beginning, so we try to explore. That's what I mean with exploratory project. We started from there were 9 or 10 macro trends, and I mentioned some. There was water management, there was circular economy, there was migration, health and aging, and so on, land and sea interaction. And we started to figure out, okay, when we talk about this field of inquiry, what trends are there emerging and what geographies they generate? And we started to run an expert consultation with stakeholders from high-level European institutions, and with their aid, we ended up defining 4 main themes that we explored more in detail in terms of what geographies they generate and how they are governed around Europe. And those themes are water management, and more in detail, how we do ensure fresh water supply in metropolitan regions. And you can see on the figures that you have overimpressed on your screen, this is something that is handled in a very different way around Europe. You can see on the right what is happening in the Paris region. We have various water basin areas, I think around 12, that are called Établissements Publics Territoriaux. And they are served in terms of fresh water supply by 3 entities. And there is a big claim from the regional government that this should be unified under the regional government. And this is an issue. This is an issue because it will make the system more resilient and so on. And you see on the left side on the slide the Danish system that identify 4 water districts within which there are 23 water basins that include water catchment area. And that's again another way to govern this issue. Then another issue we explored was biodiversity preservation in terms of how to strengthen ecological connectivity. And again, here is something that in each country is handled in a different way. You can see on the right side the longest grid network in Europe, the European grid belt. This is just one example of transnational, pan-European cooperation on how the issue can be handled. You see on the left side an example from Albania that is very interesting, is the management plan of the Vjosa Wild River National Park, and how to manage the coexistence of people and animals and life form within an area that is one of the most untamed in Europe. You see on the bottom chart the example of the Spanish livestock trail with the Canadas Reales, that are the largest one of those, that extend between different autonomous communities. And therefore, because of that, their management require different and more tricky governance issues. Then we have example in relation to industrial transition, like the territorial industry that you see on the right, but also the North Atlantic hydrogen valley that you see on the left. And then you have another issue that we tackled that was how to promote local and regional energy savings. And again, all these issues were handled and are handled in different way in different institutional contexts in Europe. What we tried to do was, on the one hand, to map those geographies, and on the other hand, and this was interesting, to survey how they are governed, without assuming that to identify the geographies generated by this trend would entail a top-down institution of new territorial governance mechanism, but by trying to figure out how they trigger creative processes from the bottom, meaning how from the bottom up stakeholders, they self-organize and try to manage this that all of a sudden emerges as a governance challenge. And we figure out how this is happening, popping up in different places, and how these, what could be good practices, they somehow diffuse around Europe and so on. So this is what we did in the project, and this is how we are going to represent it and display and disseminate to people. We are going to build, and it's almost there, a territorial governance dashboard that will show in all countries in Europe how multi-level governance in relation to these 4 topics is organized, and somehow also to assess it according to various dimensions. And I think I will end up here. I'm already over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giancarlo. I don't know if we already have some questions coming up on the Slido, but what strikes me immediately listening to you is how this renews the whole how we can approach territorial. From the EU level, the territorial approach, territorial tools has been a lot about integrated development. So we talked about community-led local development, integrated territorial investment. Everything was about bringing everyone around a territorial strategy. Now we approach these issues from a different angle. We start with a key challenge. Can we supply water in a stable, sustainable way for communities? Can we organize the industrial transition? Can we actually manage energy saving with the right skills, with the right combination of companies, all of that? How all these functional approaches come together somehow and create a huge challenge, of course, for concerned local and regional authorities, because that's how much can they effectively manage. What I'm wondering about is there a contradiction between the 2 approaches? Do they at the end come together jointly? How can you manage this complexity and this enormous demand for local and regional authorities to deal with a huge number of cooperation needs to adapt to these diversity of new geographies? I don't know if you have any immediate reflections on that, Giancarlo.
What we found out is so heterogeneous that it's very difficult to figure out a single answer. But what I notice is that on the one hand, there are some attempts from the top, meaning from the European Union, as you just mentioned, for integrated territorial investment, community-led local development approach, and so on, to put actors at the table. On the other hand, there are already spontaneous initiatives coming up from the bottom. For instance, all the issue of energy communities. They started up, and then it was somehow favored by the European Union. So I think that the crucial issue here is to find the nexus between the 2 and to put the 2 things together. So identify what is pouring up from the bottom up, and then provide it with legs with ad hoc institutional framework, with incentives, and so on. I think that would make very much the difference. And not to make the mistake to think that one-size-fits-all approach could be good. In the sense that we notice how these trends, emerging trends generating this geography, generate different type of geographies in various contexts, and therefore the answer that they are popping up are different and they must be different.
I guess the idea is the territory must be part of the answer. So when the local actors see this as part of the solution, then they naturally go into these and the territory becomes a lever to solve an issue, not an additional layer of cooperation, of coordination, which is somehow imposed on top of all the other tasks they are doing. And then, of course, sharing experiences. You said one size will not fit all, but sharing, disseminating good practice on how this can be done in an effective way, how we can, what type of evidence, how we can do it, changes the burden on the local authorities effectively. The governance dashboard you presented here also gives the idea of, depending on the regulatory framework, the types of incitations you can have from national levels, the preconditions to establish initiatives at the local level varies enormously. So the dashboard you presented on what types of frameworks are there within each member state is a very good starting point for further reflections. I understand it should be ready quite soon. Do you see how this could be used how can this dashboard be useful now in the next steps of reflections on new geographies?
Okay, yeah, the dashboard will be ready quite soon. We think in 2 or 3 months' time it will be online and operable by people. And this will allow some benchmarking from the stakeholder side. So if I'm responsible for territorial governance in a specific place in Europe, I can go there, I can see how a specific topic is dealt with in my countries and compare with what is happening in the other country and check by clicking on the various dots there what instruments are in place and how various dimensions of territorial governance scores in relation to that. So for instance, how multi-level coordination or multi-actor coordination is happening. But one important thing that we are doing also in the ESPON Nostra Geo project is to analyze more in depth specific case studies that emerged from the territorial governance analysis as good practices. And this will help a lot. This is something that ESPON has been doing since its inception. And this is trying to gather knowledge concerning good practice and then disseminate it, not in a way to trigger necessarily policy transfer and emulation, but to trigger inspiration. We know that policy transfer most of the time fails because it doesn't take into account institutional condition in the borrowing and the lending context, but it can provide inspiration. So borrow bricks of the territorial governance that happen in one place and implement it in another may put actors into an innovative thinking mood.
Excellent. So inspiration and benchmarking will be the key words. Results coming soon. Thank you very much, Giancarlo.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We'll move on to another topic. So I said we're covering 3 different spaces. One is the Alpine region. And in the Alpine region, we have had an ESPON project focusing specifically on interface areas. So approaching the Alps as a series of interface territories between highland and lowland, and how that level is maybe a promising context to explore these new geographies, to address them politically, to design strategies, to have a dialogue between stakeholders. So that's what I would hope to get from Tobias Chiller now, is a better understanding of what these interface areas are specifically, and whether one sees any need to change spatial planning policies to address these challenges at this level. So do we need to have adaptation of the frameworks to make it possible to work at the level of these interface areas? Tobias, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I'm happy to present here a bit of our project Interalp territories. And if I go to a photo that I brought, this is a photo of the Grenoble area, and this is taken from up above from the mountain and looking towards the lowlands. And this is a situation which is quite typical for alpine contexts. We have the high mountain area in the back, and we have the pre-alpine lowlands at the end of the photo here. And that kind of constellation we have all across the Alpine arc. It's not only in France, but it also in northern Italy, and in southern Germany, in Austria, and in all these countries. And in our project, we delivered a standardized definition of that kind of interface territories. So each of the areas that you see here on the map is one interface territory. And there's a complex formula behind. It's more than one page, and it's based on the settlement system, it's based on transport infrastructure, and it's based on topography, more or less. And with that kind of arguments, we come to that standardized definition of interface territories, where we say that they are comparable, that they come along with similar challenges and potentials too. So the geography as such might not be new, but the discourse on that kind of area is new. Until now, when we talk about the Alpine region, it's mostly a perimeter defined by topography, so the Alpine region is where the mountains are. But as we've seen at the example of the Grenoble photo, also the fringes are an important facet of Alpine spatial development. And we see here different kinds of interface territories. Some are more urbanized, like the Grenoble case or the Ljubljana case. Others are more rural, in particular in the Italian interface areas, and some are in between. But that's the kind of territory that we see here. And they are new also in an academic point of view, because when we talk about European spatial development, we normally talk about the FUAs, the functional urban areas, and what we see here is in the green and yellow colors, that's the classical functional urban areas, and you see there the perimeters of the interface territories. And there are often no FUAs, no big cities part of the interfaces. It's different in the case of Grenoble, that's true, but for most cases, they almost look empty, but that's not the case. I mean, if you enter into the Alps, there are a series of important and well-known settlements there that are simply not large enough to be known. And that's why we often use the slogan, roll beyond size. So even if a settlement has less than 10,000 inhabitants, it might be very important for spatial development, for the service of for public services and so on. So think about Oberstdorf, for example. It's a small, really small town. It's not a FUA, but it's important to talk about settlements like this in these areas. And I would say it's important not only for academic reasons, of course, but also because they are specific. This map shows that within most interface areas, the color scheme goes from dark red to dark green. And I can show you a series of maps that look more or less like this. This is about population. It's a demography indicator behind there, but I could also show you environmental indicators whatsoever. So there are very sharp contrasts, and these contrasts are sharper, or the contrasts are embedded in a smaller geography than at other areas. So it's particular to make spatial development in that kind of areas here. Plus, that map might be hard to read, but it shows the major transport corridors here, and they mostly have a kind of a funnel situation. So there come a lot of roads and rail infrastructures from the lowlands, meeting in these funnel situations, and then sometimes having kind of a dead end, and more often having kind of a transit funneling. Then they're coming along with very difficult planning challenges that you have to address here. So when you ask, Eric, should we do something about these topics, about these geographies, I would say yes, it's important to recognize them as really specific because they are different. Because in these funnel situations, you have a lot of demand for spatial development. You have all the corridors for transport, for energy, for all the tourists coming there. They are mostly attractive regions. I mean, this is where you go in the weekends, where you pass when you go into holidays and so on. They are mostly economically successful. So there's a lot of pressure on land use there, and coordinating it and handling it, this is a real challenge. And one should add, this is a so-called targeted analysis, so the project as such was not formulated by us, the researchers, but by stakeholders. The lead stakeholder is a German ministry, and other stakeholders came from Switzerland, from Austria, from Italy, and then there is a working group for spatial planning and sustainable development in the Alpine group behind there. That's institutionalized in the Alpine Convention framework, and they followed the process. So I would say already the institutional framework proves that there's a certain interest, but I'm already over time.
Thank you very much, Tobias. I think this is very interesting to see this way of approaching the Alps from a functional perspective. We have different approach. Alpine cooperation has been going on for decades. There have been long discussions on the Alpine core area, the objective of preserving an Alpine core, whether those are the real Alps or the others one false Alps then. The discussion where is it relevant to talk, who is legitimate to talk about the Alps. Now, when you introduce interface territory, you say this is really a territory of interactions, and definitely we can then talk about planning in a meaningful way. We can compare practices in these interfaces because there are recurring patterns, and they may call for specific types of answers, and sharing experiences makes a lot of sense. What I'm wondering now, listening to you, having seen that this would make a lot of sense, have you seen people actually taking this on board, this opportunity for developing effective, meaningful spatial planning? Do you have good practices concretely observed already on the ground that can function as sources of inspiration for other areas around the Alps?
I mean, what we have not delivered is an evaluation of regional and municipal planning procedures at the local level. So this was not the objective of the project. But and Giancarlo was part of the team. What we did was a pan-alpine, let's call it a screening of what's happening there. And what we also organized was a policy paper where we had a survey with really many experts from very different interface territories. And they contributed to a policy paper where there were three main points. One was really the recognition of interface territories as a specific type. That was one of the main outputs, and it's it's point one of this policy paper. And the second one, I have to take my notes there, was to address these challenges in a particular way. And the third one, I have to look it up later. But your question was rather what is being done in all these areas, and I would say that in most cases, it's a combination of already existing domestic instruments, so regional planning, municipal planning, sectoral planning, participation procedures, feedback loops, and so on. And I would say there are good cases as long as you consider the specificities of double demand on half of the space, as it's typical for these interface territories, as long as it's multi-level, and as long as you balance a strategic orientation and an implementation phase it. There are some examples that more explicitly or more directly address these interface territories. One is in the Torino area, the Metro Montana, it's the process called. And I would also like to underline the Swiss agglomeration projects that explicitly address to link the real mountain regions with the pre-alpine metropolitan area. So there's a lot of dynamics going on the ground, so we don't have to tell these areas that they are interface areas. They know already, but as far as we receive feedback there, it helps them to position in the multi-level governance to be recognized as specific.
Excellent. Do you see already the Alpine Space Program, the Alpine Macro Region, the Alpine Convention playing a role in disseminating this perspective on development and the needs for certain types of dialogue, of establishing trust? We know that interest can be different, highland, lowland. Are they playing a role, and do you see that emerging? Can it maybe be a result of this ESPON project that they intensify efforts in that respect?
Well, I mean, the project was closed, I think, two weeks ago, so it's still quite early to talk about the impact of the reporting here. But what certainly is already true is that in the framework of the Alpine Convention, I already mentioned this working group on spatial planning and sustainable development. That's a process going on already for a couple of years. That's also planned or foreseen to go on, and that elaborates an Alpine spatial development perspective. And that for sure will take on board the interface territories, and that really makes sense. I mean, it obviously does not make sense to always always have islands maps of the alpine region, but to also consider the fringes with all the complexities and the dynamics going on. So I expect a lot of follow-up within the framework of this process. Then I expect some regional or municipal activities to go on. I mean, you should ask Tomáš later on in the second session from the Slovenian ground what he's going to do with this. And we just had a tour de table at the end of the project with our stakeholders to ask, okay, what are you doing in Austria? And we have some ideas, and all the member states around the table had some ideas, but I think it's not my role to report on this because this is kind of a political process that I'm curious to follow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tobias. I'd like to remind you from sitting and attending this event that you can submit the questions, so feel free to use the QR code. It can come up again now, I think, on the screen. And to submit also on past presentations, if questions come up, we are taking them on board. We'll have more rounds of discussion later. So any comments and questions are very welcome, so please use the Slido. We'll move on. We had then a presentation from the Alpine region, which is an established macro region now. We are moving now on to more initiatives to promote a macro-regional strategy, to try to establish and to make sense of what they could become. We're going to start with the Carpathian region, where there also have been a convention now for more than 20 years, so it's an established cooperation area, but as I said, not yet a macro-regional strategy. Katarzyna, you have coordinated the Karpat project, and we'd like to know how this project informed discussions on the unique features of Carpathian region and the potential value or added value of strengthening Carpathian cooperation. And we'd like also to know more about your proposals on how Carpathian cooperation could be informed from these analyses. What kind of evidence need did you perceive, and how have you fed the stakeholders with evidence? Katarzyna, please.
Thank you. So definitely Carpathian cooperation is at more earlier stages than more advanced Alpine cooperation. And so I think it's important to maybe stress the obvious, the fact that mountainous areas are unlike river basins, unlike natural networks that connect, mountains divide people and divide communities and divide space. And so there is a strong need to find, governance solutions, and there is need for collaboration, especially now and especially in this up and coming macro region that is faced with many challenges, but also very dynamic social, economic, but also political issues. So first of all, if we talk about Carpathians and we think about the assets, the kind of strong capitals that they have, is many stakeholders, and also our own research shows that the natural heritage is an important feature. As you can see in the map on the left, Carpathian mountains host last truly wild and authentic woodlands in Europe, and maybe and they are wild, and this is I would say a continental natural heritage that needs protection and that has been protected on national levels, but there is a need to maybe think in a more macro-regional scale regarding this topic. Another important asset is the cultural heritage, which also is, to a certain extent, authentic, proved resilient, but is also at risk of being commercialized, drawn over with over-tourism. As you can see, the most valued cultural heritage locations are located within the mountain range of Carpathian Mountains. And this is linked to heritage and historic relationship with the mountains coming up from the mountain communities like Górale, Lemkos, Bojkos, and Vlach shepherds, and also Huzuls in Ukrainian Carpathians. So with these dynamic economic processes, there is a risk that these two most valuable assets will to some extent be at risk. This region is growing, this region is up and coming, and there is a visible divide of north-western part, which is much more integrated within the European core economic networks and labor markets, and there is this southeastern part, which is lagging behind, but also facing very rapid growth in certain locations. So these mountains are dividing, but they're also an opportunity to link different sectors of economic growth and labor markets. Interestingly, this area is also polarizing. There are a lot of social processes going on. Strong metropolization, as we can see, with suburbanization. So on one hand, we have housing markets that are becoming much more competitive and exclusive. On the other hand, there are regions that are depopulating very rapidly and making it very challenging, again, to govern social services there. This region is also, or this macro region is also a place where many social risks are still very valid, where there's big pressure for economic-based immigration, outflow of people, and human capital. So these are some of the macro-regional challenges that are very same for many governments and also regional authorities. This is also a region that is not the most innovative. Not that there aren't many talented people or innovative institutions or companies. There simply still is not enough capacity or knowledge how to commercialize it. And so this is the region where a lot of industry and logistics is also placed. But this region is connected. The governance collaboration is there. There is also a visible and obvious policy mobility diffusing from the Alpine region through Vienna as a gateway of macro-regional collaboration. And in a Carpathian macro region, it's Budapest and Bratislava that are the main hubs. This region is also interconnected through transport links that are also being built through the mountains. So there are a lot of infrastructural projects going on, which are very high on policy agenda, especially on regional level. The big policy questions are: how do we protect nature? Are we ready for a more radical idea of the multinational national Carpathian Park? For some, this idea is too radical and controversial. Do we need a dedicated Carpathian program like Interreg? Or is the local and diversified governance collaboration enough? Do we need a contact point? And what are the sectors that we would like to cooperate? Is it only tourism and environmental protection? Or maybe also renewable energies, digitalization, and transport connectivity? Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katarzyna. As I said, I'm quite curious about the added value of the Carpathian. How does it add something to local regional development to the approach? You emphasize a lot nature protection, preservation of cultural heritage. Would you say that those are the key components in a context where we know there are major social and economic challenges, that the Carpathian level is an instrument to preserve the attention to also protection of biodiversity, of natural and cultural heritage in this context of major other challenges also?
I think that in terms of tourism, the trends that we can see, slow tourism, more authentic tourism, and linking natural tourism like hiking, biking, etc., to food tourism, right? Or spa towns. There are so many spa towns in the region. I didn't have enough maps to show you. This region has a tremendous potential in terms of that. I think it's trending. I think recently places like Moldova are trending because of its unique location, because it's the most unvisited place in Europe. So you never know with social media what will go in the pipeline in terms of visibility. But generally we can say that it's very coherent in terms of the image and potential are these two main Carpathian capitals, natural and social capitals. And also a lot of local authorities see this as a potential to gain economic movement, to transform the more rural economies towards tourism, to link the cities, like to maybe interlink the interface areas, which are not that well pronounced yet in the Carpathian macro-region, to build these interlinkages, to link depopulating areas to local growth nodes. And there will be investment in this area. It still has the price advantage, and with the geopolitics, also in terms of economic geopolitics, a lot of sectors are coming back to Europe, like manufacturing, maybe some electronics. This is the most possible investment region in Europe, and the growth will happen there. We need to protect the assets that have been there forever and are able to also transform the economies to a more green, sustainable, and circular economies, and not only manufacturing and building infrastructure for that type of sectors. So I think there is a link indeed, and it does translate to local decision making, and there is need for collaboration to strategize together and maybe collaborate rather than compete for investment and governance. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you reviewed a number of transformations that trigger the emergence of new geographies. Mm-hmm. These new geographies can become resilient, robust, if they're accompanied by appropriate spatial planning. So I think you touched on the series of topics mm-hmm. we'll be getting back to in the final round of discussion. Thank you very much, Katarzyna. Alexandre, we will now move to the other side of the European continent. We are going to the western peripheries and facing the Atlantic. I would like you to know from you what common challenges and opportunities do you see in the Atlantic region? What have you identified in this ESPON project? And how do you think territorial cooperation and good governance can be enhanced in such a unique territory? Alexandre, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you to ESPON for the opportunity to be here. The potential Atlantic macro-region is actually quite challenging because unlike other macro-regions, existing ones and potential ones, the Atlantic is a kaleidoscope of cultures, economic realities, very asymmetric, from industrial regions like Bilbao, Pays de la Loire, Porto, to very touristical regions with almost zero industry like the Canary Islands, to industry areas that are still very rural. And so these differences in terms of cultures, in terms of economic landscape, actually creates a puzzle of dynamics and trends that is quite challenging to tackle. And this is the first thing we notice when we're looking for the Atlantic macro-region and its potential. Because what we are looking for is the value added of these new geographies. So to what extent creating a new geography can actually help in delivering the economic, political, societal goals that we are aiming to. And so when we're looking at this, we were looking at uncovering using the atlases and the trend analysis, uncovering these patterns that already exist, looking for functional areas, but also understanding when there are no functional areas, if those dynamics can be created. Because again, this is a very widespread territorial, and we need to find an identity. And when we started looking, I remembered when I was a kid and we looked at the world map. We always position Europe in the center, and so the dichotomy in terms center-periphery, we are in the center, and America or China are the periphery when we look at this. So when we look at European map from the usual perspective, what you'll see, was moving too fast. What you'll see is that the center of Europe comes, especially when you look at innovation, and this is the result of the European innovation horizon. You'll see that from the northern part of Italy throughout Germany and a bit of France and the southern part of UK, you'll have the vast majority of innovation and growth potential, which is where the engine of economics in Europe lies. And this was called in the past the blue banana. And when we look at the positioning of the Atlantic macroregion, which is in the coastal area, we see that it is in a peripheral position if we look at our map like this. But if we look at the Atlantic, not in the perception that is turned towards Brussels or the center of Europe, but it's turned towards the ocean and the American continent and Africa. This means we have a central position that can be very interesting in projecting the influence, the economic links of Europe towards America and Africa, which in the current context of significant changes in geopolitical and geoeconomical, this can be an added value, it can be a signature. And when we are thinking about repositioning and the added value of these new geographies, we started looking also in terms of identity. And of course, we cannot replicate the blue banana, but we need the blue banana part of innovation in a more traditional sense of ocean technologies, maritime industries, etc. But we also could address the green part, and we could have a green and blue banana in the Atlantic coastal area, where we combine sustainability and innovation in terms of digital in the mega trends that we need to comply. Creating a new pathway of growth that also allows to respond to a big challenge, which is no matter what we are, although the Atlantic region is not growing poorly, it is growing slowly than other regions, and especially the center. So in order to catch up, we need a new stimulus and we need a new direction. And this was one of the major challenges. Of course, that there are other challenges that are relevant when we look at the aging population, which is more or less the pattern of Europe, but you'll see that in the coastal region of the Atlantic is pretty severe, especially in Portugal and Spain. And this is more aggravated by the fact that there is a socioeconomic divide between the urban and the rural areas in the Atlantic macroregion, or the potential Atlantic macroregion. So we have common challenges that we need to find the right value proposition. Administrative boundaries provide a governance framework that is interesting and is solid and is established. But we must not allow these administrative boundaries to become a constraint over growth, over other flexible approaches, and we don't see that a potential macroregion is a competitor to the traditional national and the regional level, but a complement to address what is common and to create the necessary scale to reposition all the region towards the Atlantic and respond to these challenges, where not only the aging that we need to deal together, but also the issues that are associated with this, like migration. Some of these regions have been replenishing its population stock and labor force stock through migration, and we also need to address this. And finally, related to this, also highlight a major challenge. It's not historically strange that the blue banana is in the center of Europe. This is where the most advanced industries, the most advanced research institutions, and the largest concentration of human capital lies in Europe. And when you look at the human capital in the Atlantic region, you see a pattern that is also worrisome. We have still a significant deficit in terms of tertiary education, especially in comparison to Central Europe, and we also have a deficit in terms of competencies and skills in levels 4 and 5 of each set, especially targeted for the new technologies upcoming, robotics, digital, etc. So if the human capital and the labor force is not ready to absorb technology and to use it properly, this means that we will be somehow stumbling in our own feet. So in essence, we had two major challenges. One, trying to analyze and uncover the patterns and the functionalities. And secondly, also strategically imagine how can a macro region be a better fit in terms of addressing new challenges and devising new dynamics, which clearly are necessary, otherwise the center-periphery dichotomy will still hold for the many upcoming years.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. I think you very nicely synthesized the specificity of the Alpine area, how it relates to the rest of Europe. I'm wondering, when you now think about common traits, whether you see new geographies in this area that have a specific shape in the Atlantic compared to other parts of Europe, whether these new geographies are within the Alpine region or whether they connect the Alpine region to the more continental parts of Europe. Where do you see, what's your take so far in the project on the specificities of new geographies in the Atlantic region?
I imagine you were mentioning the Atlantic, although you're mentioning a lot of time the Alpine.
I'm sorry, I was talking Atlantic.
We don't have the mountains, we have the sea.
Sorry.
The issue of the Atlantic, even the Atlantic, because it's quite different and it's quite widespread, this means that we will have functional or sub-macro regions that will collate. We did a network analysis, giving you an example, network analysis on Horizon programs to understand a little bit the focus of the scientific institutions and the companies pertaining to these regions. And this uncovers a very different pattern. When we're looking at maritime technologies or maritime industries, not in the sense of fisheries, but robotics, naval construction, you'll find a pattern that is mostly linked to the most industrialized regions, and where regions like Algarve or Canary Islands will not show up. When you're looking at the few projects that are on tourism, of course, those regions light up in the network analysis. So the potential macro region is very different and very scattered in terms of their innovation potential. So establishing the links and the functionality is not easy per se. What we believe is that there are common challenges that can create common missions to be addressed. And this allows for a reorganization of the space. And this will allow also to a flexible reorganization of the space. So some of the questions will be answered within the setting of the macro region, but not necessarily by all the regions that are part of the macro region. But the macro region provides the right umbrella to gather this enough critical mass, enough competencies, and especially to devise a new identity, a new value proposition that is common to all and that embraces the Atlantic not only by its past history that all these regions have, but also embrace it as the new economic opportunity, the new West. And in that sense, the macro region as a whole is the interface of Europe with the rest of the world, especially the West world.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you very nicely synthesized where the macro region can make a difference, how establishing an alternative model, and that you need a critical mass in this model in order to impose it somehow, to make it relevant, maybe in interaction with EU bodies, but also in interaction with the regions themselves, that they are not alone in this. This is being established jointly, and then it gets another legitimacy in each regional context to establish. So thank you very much for this. Great, we've now been going around Europe somehow in different respects. We've been approaching this notion of new geographies, functional areas from different perspectives. You've touched on the topics in different ways. I think still could be useful to go around a bit to get a synthesis. If I tell you, is the macro region itself a functional area, how would you answer? Is each of your macro region considered a functional area, or how would you answer that question? Maybe Tobias, if you could start on this.
That's a big question. Thanks for this. First of all, the Interalp project was not on the macro region as such, but I like to discuss this topic. I mean, when you talk about mountain regions, you define them normally with a topography, which is a homogeneity indicator. So it's not a functional region. I mean, there are certainly a lot of functions within this homogeneous topography in a way, but it's not a functional approach there. So if you want to define a macro region with a functional indicator, then you have to prove that the interlinkages within this area is stronger than between the area and beyond. And I'm pessimistic that it's possible. So if you see let's say the Austrian highlands and the Austrian lowlands, there are certainly more interlinkages than between the Austrian highlands and the French highlands, because it's difficult to have interlinkages there. So I would say it's hard to prove functional definitions in mountain areas. But, and now there comes Interalp in the game, all countries that have an alpine share, they have these interface territories. So it's a common challenge in the territory. And via this argument, I would say there are strong arguments to say that the macro region, or let's put it rather as a pan-alpine governance approach, does make sense. Because if you have that kind of common challenges, you need a platform where you can exchange on this, where you can discuss solutions and so on. And just to be clear in the wordings, in the Alpine region, we have a macro region which is the USALP, and then we have the Alpine Convention, which is a multilateral intergovernmental treaty and framework. Both are pan-Alpine, and for both settings, it certainly makes sense to talk about common challenges. I don't know if that's an answer, but it's a try.
Thank you very much. Now, this is a very good starting point. I'll continue going around. Katarzyna, for the same question, are the Carpathians a functional area? What is your take on that?
Well, I definitely have to agree with Tobias that it's the challenges that would define what is common in this area rather than connections. And in case of Carpathian macroregion, and in case of the debate or the possible policy solution that we were proposed by the stakeholders, there are two competing geographies, the Danube River Interreg program and whole macro-regional collaboration, which is much easier, much more natural, much more structurally similar, right? And then we have the idea that there might be a Carpathian Interreg program, which would encompass most of the countries that are in the Danube program, and there is a political clash. And there is something that would need a lot of argumentation for the EU to make this decision. So there is, of course, this very specific issue in this very specific case of Carpathian Mountains. However, when it comes to challenges, I think that especially with environmental protection, and this is the most, the most active topic that the Carpathian Convention members are into. This needs, I would say, international governance. So the topic of the Carpathian multinational national park has been put by environmental organizations on the table. It's being contested, it's being supported. There are a lot of arguments for and against it. However, it would need definitely this macro-regional approach to governance, and there has been a bottom-up movement to do it, especially in the project National Parks, which tries to look for some standards, some type of unification of protection policies among all of the singular national parks, which are based in Carpathian Mountains. So I would say both, really. to sum up your question. Yeah.
It's a very interesting point. We may get back to it more in detail. But when you think of a national park, then we have a specific axis in the ESPON Nostalgia project about ecological connectivity, trying to explore, do policies adapt to ecological corridors of different kinds? The question is whether the essential justification of a possible Carpathian natural park would be, because this makes sense in terms of nature protection, or is it essentially because we need some kind of political weight behind the initiative, which then requires a transnational agreement to be upheld? What is the key? And
yeah, I think politics in this case is very temporally sensitive, and namely now the geopolitical situation is very much in favor of collaboration, and I think both in economic terms but also in terms of security issues, the mountainous areas are really important in terms of international security, and therefore now there is this window of opportunity to set up macro-regional collaborations, regardless of this evidence-based policy recommendations regarding economy, environment, etc. There is a political will and window of opportunity. So I think this is also a very important factor in making up for macro-regional political initiatives that do have certain budgets as well, yeah.
I think you illustrate very nicely how producing applied research on this it's increasingly obvious that applied research is a dialogue. It's not a linear process where you deliver to what the policymakers need. No, you listen to what policymakers, what processes they're into. You talked about geopolitical windows of opportunity, and that determines how we can help. And that's a debate we'll have later this morning on how exactly can we help best, and getting fully engaged in this dialogue perspective, the non-linear, the circular, the constant dialogue, and then what is the evidence behind to guide this dialogue. Sorry, Alexander, we're getting lost a bit in the Carpathians, but we'll certainly move on to the Atlantic. What is your take? You touched on the topic previously, but on the Atlantic as a functional area, maybe you can synthesize a bit your view on that.
I would say that the Atlantic and several areas of cooperation across Europe are in tendency functional, but in practice dysfunctional, which is not the simplest thing to say, but the fact is it's hard to break the boundaries of administrative frontiers. It's necessary to have clear mandates in the institutions. It's necessary to have a clear political commitment within this process in order to make it happen. And the biggest challenge here is to understand, and that is apprehended by most, what is the value added of the macro region, and why do we need it, and if this is the best geography to tackle the issues that we agree it's our mission. And in this sense, what we believe is that this is, like you were saying, this is an ongoing learning process, that it is fundamental that is able to mobilize all stakeholders, to mobilize people, to involve them in defining the strategy and the missions that we want to target together. And this is a process of transformation. This is of creating a vision of change. And this is the biggest challenge in the Atlantic macro-regional potential. We need to come up with a vision that creates unity towards others and that mobilizes actors in order for the institutions to actually spend resources and allocate resources to find these geometries of collaboration, which is hard because in the end of the day, we're asking institutions that are regionally bounded or nationally bounded to establish cooperation, which is almost like an extra job. So this is actually a little bit tricky to implement. I would say that the biggest challenge here is, especially in the case of the Atlantic, is not looking for the functional aspects, because there's lots of dysfunctionalities also because of the geography and the institutional landscape, different countries, different ministries, different levels of regional autonomy. So this is quite puzzling. It's easier to do it, in my perception, the other way around. Let's try together to come up with a a common vision, a common trajectory, where it's easier to identify how we can all contribute to the same and how we all benefit from that. The socioeconomic benefits need to accrue to everybody, otherwise people don't mobilize. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we also see in Europe. We will see the mobilization of Europe because we have, I will say it anyhow, but we are now identifying common enemies or common issues that are very worrisome. And so this means that we are converging. And let me add two things, which I think are the great opportunities for the Atlantic macroregion. Defense, because as mountains are important, ocean control is very, very important for defense. And that's not possible without the Atlantic regions. This is the gateway of Europe. This is where the most majority of the infrastructure, even connectivity towards America go through. So this is a key issue. And reindustrialization can take stock on this demand pool that will come from defense, which is very innovative, and they can benefit from it. And then renewables. The largest potential of energy production from renewables, especially wind, is there. But again, it's important the coalition of these regions for one simple thing, and you know this from every country. There's a dam in a rural area, but the benefits accrue to the capital city because this is where the headquarters of the company that owns the dam are. So the generation of the wealth in the ocean will be benefited by Berlin, Paris, and not by those regions. So we need to have a joint coalition that somehow can fight for a better distribution and to somehow create and jointly create responses to the challenge interactively. For me, the most important thing, and I think you were brilliant on that take, is that this applied research is interactive and iterative. It will take time. We are improving in terms of governance skills. What we need is something that is very complex, which is polycentric governance. Polycentric in the way that it's not just multi-level, that we are somehow coordinating national levels, regional levels, local levels, but also cross-cutting, because we also need to address the silos that are thematical in our own government structures and agencies. And when tackling this, we need an ensemble solution, not a partial solution, which is the biggest challenge and difficulty that we'll have. So in a very humble way, what we intend, and I'll finish, is to identify one or two missions that somehow can be the prototypes and the departure points to starting to structure a joint agenda, a joint thinking, a joint action, and most importantly, a common identity.
Excellent. I think you very nicely synthesize how new geographies is also a geography of policy projects, of ambitions. It's not only realities as they emerge and handling, it's about how do we deal with geopolitical transformation? How do we deal with green and digital transformation of industries? How do we deal with impacts of climate change? All of this comes together somehow, but it's a new geography and it's not adapting, it's about the projection into a project. And then what are the projects of new geographies and what do they imply? So I think that's a fascinating projection. What I also take from this discussion is how we're moving into complexity, which maybe challenges traditional maps, the way we look at the territory. It is not pretty, the map where you have the Carpathian very extensively overlapping with the Danube. Somehow our cartographic imaginations are a bit struggling to say that this is an appropriate framework. At the same time, you nicely illustrated, Katarzyna, how issues are different and there is a justification for different types of cooperation, mainly a lot in the same areas, and that the new geographies of the Carpathians are different from the new geographies of the Danube. Yes. So the coexistence of these different instances can be demonstrated. We then need to find a language to convey this. The challenge we may have, we may get back to that later this morning rather, is about how we work on this a bit full time. We are very much engaged in these issues. Some picture emerges. How do we convey these types of ideas of new missions, of new types of arrangement, new types of system transformations to a broader audience, which makes it politically viable? How do we give it? Typically, we talked also about having an Interreg, Carpathian Interreg. Well, we know that Interreg programs, they are not overlapping so much. Well, at least they are supposed to be some kind of partition of the EU space with some nuances. Well, now what you're saying is, well, we have a space which is much more overlapping. How can this be brought into the policy making of how transnational cross-border programs are being designed, thought through? How do you incorporate interfaces in cross-border cooperation, etc.? So you have a complexity of space which we somehow need to find ways of, we should help policymakers of making them conveyable, understandable, generating imaginations, and what kind of figures, what kind of representations can we then use to make these representations understandable to a broad audience, to make it manageable, basically. I don't know if anything emerges from the Slido, if we have an audience, our audience is interested in what we say, if you think this is stimulating in some way, we're very happy to have your comments as well. Does it seem meaningful? Do you have any reactions on what we're saying? I see some questions coming up. Now I have many coming up, so I'll try to. A technical definition of what is understood by new geographies I see on top here. I don't know if there is a technical definition. I think on the contrary, it's a very non-technical issue, but do you have any comments, maybe Giancarlo, if you want to comment on definition of new geographies?
I can try. It's not really technical, but it's what we used in the project, in the sense that to define new geographies, we started from the trends. We define a new geographies that emerge and respond to specific emerging trends. Mm-hmm. Then we had to narrow down because of the magnitude of the project. But basically, any geography that emerges in response to emerging trends that is not overlapping with traditional administrative geographies or with the usual suspect of functional geography, we can define as new geographies. I wouldn't label macro-regions as new geographies and as functional geographies, as it was already discussed here, but they could be governance platform for handling new geographies. In the sense that we saw from the map that all our colleagues have shown today, how many of the trends that we explored for the Nostra Geo project, they do have some relevance in terms of challenges, but also potentials for specific territories in the macro regions. And to govern them, you cannot do it through traditional administrative boundaries. So to have a container, a very porous container of polycentric governance, I really like the definition that Alexander has brought forward, would help. So I think the issue here is how to motivate actors to buy in to this structured platform of polycentric governance. They need to see that there is an added value. And this you find and you show for research, and this interactive approach to research in which you don't feed policymaking, and you are not just asked to feed policymaking, but you recursively interact and discuss challenges as well as opportunities. Not only about challenges. I think it's about challenges and opportunities. And I see in the 3 macro regions there are a lot that somehow link to the trends that we analyze in the Nostra Geo project.
Excellent. This notion of polycentric governance I'd like to stick to a little bit. I think, how can we convey it? This links different territories then. We're linking across. And is it then sectorally driven? This idea, well, energy is produced in one part, it's being transformed into value in another part. How do we bring this together in some kind of fair distribution of benefits, of burdens? So is it a sectorally driven process with territorial implications? Is that how you see it? I don't know, Alexander, if you want to get back to what your understanding of this polycentric governance.
I see it around missions. Not sectoral, but missions. So if our challenge is to tackle energy safety, energy security of Europe, based on renewables, imagining, so we need to find a solution that combines different interests, even in terms of spatial planning in the sea. Because this will conflict with fisheries, this will conflict with trade routes, this will conflict with connectivity. And so when we're mentioning polycentric, we are acknowledging that from the strategy to implementation, usually it's not a single direction solution. We need to have a multi-dimensional solution that is not simply dependent on different levels of governance. It's dependent on different areas of governance and different departments. And I think this is a key bottleneck that limits us. Because when I'm talking about polycentric governance, I'm talking about a more flexible arrangement, a new geometry, not a new geography, or if you want, also a new geography of institutions that are gathered around a mission, which allows for a wholesome response to this challenge. Otherwise, we always have a partition, the challenge. The science part will think about research, but then no economy whatsoever. The economy part will think, yes, let's do renewables, but the lands that are generating the revenue see no benefit at all. And they are created an environmental cost, because you plant the windmills on sea, you generate an environmental cost for those regions to which no benefit accrues. But the answer needs to be joint together. And this is why I call polycentric. It's not enough just a multi-level scenario. We need a more complex setting of governance. And this is why I think the macro-regional will provide a good environment for this.
Bringing this down to concrete evidence, now we're talking about how can we, as an applied research program, contributors to a program at least, contribute to inform these discussions. What you just presented implies we should focus more on territorial implications of more, let's say, spatial policies like transitioning to renewable energy. What does it imply across Europe? What are the positive, negative impacts on different territories? And that as a starting point for a discussion then on how it can be governed.
I would start with one basic thing, which also helps me to reply to one of the questions around CBAS and strategy, which is we are not bad at devising the strategy. We are not good at implementing it. So our ability in EU as a whole, but especially in these regions, we write nice strategies, very well thought of strategies, but then implementation is a very different thing. And why do we have this implementation trap? Because we have competing institutions, competing territories, where we are actually competing against each other. We should be competing against China and the US. So we are misfocusing our competition. And because of this overlap of institutions, this overlapping of turfs, this creates a puzzle that is hard. And this is why it's necessary a platform of governance, like a macro region, to actually deploy the strategy. When I'm talking about polycentric and giving this example, we need to find a way of integrating the different topics of, for instance, let's look at the ocean. We are looking at ocean technologies. It's obvious for everybody that there's a huge untapped potential in the sea, but we have not untapped for many years. And we are still way far from it, because there was never a strong focus that was mobilizing not only researchers but also economic activities to find ways to make the sea profitable. And when we want to exploit the sea and create a pilot zone for testing technologies, we will need to handle security and defense. We'll need to handle the science part, we need to handle the economics, the environmental. So all these 4 or 3 dimensions need to be taken into the solution, the institutional solution, in order to make it feasible. This is all actually true also in basic stuff. For instance, not talking about the Atlantic, but the part of the sea, the Northern Sea, that is shared by the small coast of Belgium. The small coast of Belgium is shared by 16 ministries. 16. So it's impossible to think of a policy addressing the coast of Belgium without somehow finding a way of creating a coalition between these 16 ministries. Now, take this to a different level, and the challenge is much greater. For me, polycentric governance is the next step beyond. And where research is important is not only identifying this mission, but also learning how to make these processes feasible. Because this institutional framework is quite complex. We need to find a way of making it very clear to the political stakeholders and institutional stakeholders, why is this matter? Why is this relevant? And then pass this to a clear mandate, institutional mandate, and to which is also necessary one very important thing. We need better institutions, we need capacity building to prepare these institutions to think beyond their own administrative frontiers. Because we're talking about cooperation, but if I don't know you, it will be very hard to connect effectively. So we need to find ways that Interreg already helps, but find ways to create joint capacities to address this issue. And this is why I think that the easiest way is either a common goal or a common enemy to unite people behind it.
Excellent. Which maybe you wanted then to address briefly the question on why you need a macro-regional strategy when you already have a sea basin strategy for the Atlantic, in a few words.
Yeah, we need the macro-region as a platform for governance. And also like a massive political and governmental forum. It's not a discussion forum, it's a political forum where we are able to mobilize the regions and the institutions toward those missions. The sea basin strategy provides the strategic landscape, but as many strategies in Europe, the outcomes are very slim. You mentioned Brazil. What I was studying there is transmission mechanisms, which is basically when you have a strategy, how you transfer it into practice. And we have a huge, powerful engine and strategy that we devote with the RDF and so on, but then our transmission mechanism is so long that the power that reaches the wheels, like in a car, is much less than the one that we generated. So we are not able to deliver results because we are lacking the right governance frameworks to actually have a complete response to these challenges. And this is why I believe that the macro region is essential for this. If it's macro, if it's meso, it's not relevant. What is relevant is finding a geometry that can actually deliver a full response. Otherwise, what you have is always a disconnected response, which impact in the territory will be very basic.
Thank you. Giancarlo, you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, again on this polycentric governance notion, I think it will also somehow help us to not see the overlapping of macro regions as a problem. Kasia was mentioning how the Carpat macro region would overlap partly with the Danube region, but actually there is already an overlapping between the Danube region and the Adriatic-Ionic region and with the Alpine region as a part. And I think this is not an issue if we consider it from the polycentric governance perspective. Actually, the density of this macro-regional cooperation and governance will somehow be an evidence of how that territory it is at the crossroad of phenomena right now. If you think about the area of the Carpathian, and it is at the very forefront of European integration at the moment. Yeah? The enlargement is happening in that area. And it is at one historical low at the moment in terms of pace. And it's something that Europe need to consider. So to provide a platform would keep the momentum going, in my opinion. That's another important thing for that territory, is that is at the crossroad of logistics and transportation. It is where the two roads of the Belt and Road Initiative meet. And to have a platform that allows actors to coordinate, it would somehow be a very important antibody against the free-for-all approach that has been adopted by a country in negotiating in the Belt and Road Initiative environment. So I think geopolitically, to have cooperation in the Carpathian area, and generally speaking, in that part of Europe, is particularly important. And from the other end, what Alexander was saying on the Atlantic, it is similar. Yeah? You were mentioning how it is important for defense, but it's also important for cooperation with the other side of the Atlantic, not necessarily in defense matter. No? It is more than ever important nowadays that we build bridges somehow, and through this polycentric governance, we can do that, I think.
Excellent. You mentioned infrastructure and transport connection. We have a concrete question on TEN-T, on the North Sea Rhine Mediterranean corridor, a structuring element now in Europe. Whether this is a new geography, do you see it as a potential macro-regional context? This is a very different approach. Up to now, we were talking a very established notion, Atlantic, Carpathian, Alpine. These are very old, established subdivisions of the European Union. Now, a transport corridor is a different beast somehow. And how does that change the perspective?
It is very interesting because on the one hand, it is very sectoral. No? We're talking about transport, we're talking about mobility, we're talking about logistics. But then this is having an impact. Wherever it is realized, it doesn't talk anymore about transport and logistics only. It changes the life of people. It generates or not territorial development. And here again, we should consider the difference of implementation of the Trans-European Network in Europe and the infrastructural corridor that belong to the Belt and Road Initiatives, and what impact they leave on the ground. So again, I think it's very important to consider the governance network that are triggered by this trans-European network. You could really see how they engage with actors from various levels, multi-levelly, and also from the bottom up, providing a platform for interaction of the actors from municipalities, for instance, or anyway, local governments. So I would say it is a positive model. I'm not sure it is a new geography. They are there from some time. But again, the provision of this, what we call porous platform of polycentric governance could help to keeping it all together, sticking it all together. Because if we keep seeing that as sectoral, then we don't get out of the conundrum we have.
I think we start to emerge, the structuring of the dialogue interests me. We start seeing now a meaning of these transnational areas, creating a critical mass in that legitimacy for a certain way of approaching space at local, regional level, at EU level. It's important in that respect. We have the notion of new geography, which is really about what emerging trends generate, what policy projects generate. So new geography is really about somehow moving along the trend of what policymakers, we as a communities want, and what we see as changing our daily lives, our economic development perspectives, our need to preserve biodiversity, etc. And then we have this polycentric governance models coming on top and adding up how we can translate this into policy messages. So I think it's very interesting through the dialogue now between the projects, how we see a clarification of the discourse, which would then be very important to convey further in order, precisely as to bring clarity into these discussions. What is a new geography? What is a functional area? Why do we need transnational levels? What is their role in all of that? So thank you very much for that, for those allowing us in a way to clarify the discourse in these ways. I see some other questions. Maybe we can go also a bit around the detailed or specific points. There was a specific point now, you talked about the demographic challenge, Alexandre, in the Atlantic area. Returning of people, what concretely answers, what does it call for? The question I asked was about policies to incentivize young people to return. There are many other ways of trying to deal with this challenge of access to skills and people in more peripheral parts, which also is relevant for other macro regions, by the way.
This is an interesting question because I can do the connection also with the issue of the polycentric governance. These regions, that most of them were developing regions or less developed, they receive ERDF funding and ESF funding to improve their universities, their institutions, and to create human capital that then moves to the center of Europe where the majority of the economic stronghold is. So this detachment implies that although we are fostering human capital, they are migrating, and our assets are moving towards the center and making the periphery even weaker. And this implies that we are not changing that's economic reality. We can, in the setting of a polycentric approach where we can stimulate governments also to provide a better spread of the industry and these companies, maybe that's a solution, but more importantly, we need to compensate this exit with entrances. And so we need not only to reattract, which is the answer, people that have left and want to come back home and create tax benefits, which in some cases already exist, to bring them back home and create a more economically competitive environment for them. But at the same time, we also need to replenish, and for this, migration can be very important. We need migration not only for the basic services that we are using for tourism. Tourism and agriculture depend almost exclusively on migration now, which is quite worrisome, but we also have the opportunity of bringing people that are now qualified from South America, etc., and somehow replenish the stock of people that we are losing to the center of Europe because of the gravity effect, if you want, the economic gravity. So again, I think this is an interesting approach to address this, but there are incentives to come back home, but again, also disaggregate it.
I think we can maybe go around the table on these demographic issues, which are key, a starting point. I don't know if the interface territories, you look at demography and demographic trends, which are quite different in the different parts of interface area, Tobias, in the Alpine context?
Yeah, it's quite heterogeneous across the interface territories, but also within. I mean, it's often the case that in the lowlands you have a lot of attraction, and in the highlands it's much more difficult, but there's not much, not really the one size fits all solution to it. And I would say in the end, it's really what one of the last comments says, it's about process governance. This is really how you have to address these things. It's not about so much formats or instruments and not even budgets as such. It's really about a process, and process means how can I get the right people around the table? In my case, from the highlands and the lowlands, but also across the sectors. I mean, it's rather easy to find technical solutions for transport issues, for energy issues, for housing issues, for ecological connectivity issues, but to find solutions that are integrated, that's the issue then. And then you have periods where you have to address new challenges. We have talked about geopolitics, or it can be hazard prevention in some areas of the Alpine area. And so how can you ensure a process that can adapt to new challenges, that is sure to have the right people around the table, and that does not end in the implementation trap, as you put it, and that has to foresee from the beginning responsibilities, resources, and objectives also. And I think it's a hard way in the Atlantic area to find that kind of setting. I think in the Alpine region we started much earlier, and there are a lot of formats in place. But still, on the ground, it's quite difficult. And coming back to demography, I mean, this is really place specific, and there you have to go into. I mean, there are touristic projects that try to find ways via second homes and stuff like this. And there are also very official in-migration strategies to really cover the need for qualified staff. I mean, this is a discussion of its own. But yeah.
I just feel it's important. We talked a lot about industrial transitions, biodiversity preservation. Maybe it feels a bit far away from local realities of individuals, but we have new geographies of aging. We have new geographies of our health provision. We know Alpine area, Carpathian, Atlantic, they're all struggling with how do you effectively preserve access to health services in the context of aging. With increasing dependency on migration, the geographies are changing. And also that is a factor. If you do not have access to health, you will not have economic development. These are all bottlenecks. Everything is interconnected. And there again, what would then be the polycentric governance of adequate, sufficient access to health services, to services for our seniors in a context of aging in these areas which have a specific geographic preconditions. Katarzyna, do you want to comment from your perspective? I know it's also a big challenge in the Carpathian area. Or...
Yes. First of all, I think even though when this macro-regional structure, like official governance structure, doesn't happen, but there is demand, other things happen. And this is what we can see in the Carpathian macro region, that there is no formal Interreg program, but the density of the EGTC collaboration, of Euro-regions collaborations, of different Interreg collaborations, cross-border programs, or bigger within the Central Europe Interreg is happening. And I did this analysis in spatial terms myself, and I was really surprised how densely packed the different levels of collaboration, starting with the smallest, cutest EGTCs connecting 3 towns, and ending up with this big Central Europe Interreg. And this is really densely packed, and I would say this is very multi-level, and it includes both territorial collaboration and also sectoral collaboration. And so in our project, we did this little intellectual and research-based exercise regarding what you were saying about building a vision. So what we did is we literally put many different maps regarding economic issues, regarding potentials, regarding megatrends, regarding dynamic indicators, static indicators, structural indicators. And then we decided, okay, what is the common goal? Green transformation, sustainable transport, environmental preservations. These were policy goals that the stakeholders named, right? And then we thought about how to support for decentralized resilience, because this is what is very important for the security. Of course, like the top-down approach is very important, having the same vision, having standardized procedures, but it's also what is the condition of the locality. And then we tried to make these visions according to different accents, different scenarios, but taking into consideration what is going on in the locality at NUTS 3 level, because this is a very important level. And we are now editing together with the ESPON program and the stakeholders the results of our visions, our, maybe it's too far to say territorial scenarios. But it was surprisingly, it went surprisingly well. So I think it's also a responsible of the researchers and stakeholders to put this knowledge together layer by layer, and to look at the small locality, or the NUTS 3, or the regional locality, and see in which ways can we adapt our growth using our assets in order to achieve synergies of the common strategic goal. And I think, yeah, it really needs a dialogue between these different groups, the policymakers, the researchers, the stakeholders. And I think this is the biggest advantage of the ESPON program, that it allows these exercises to happen.
You're touching on a very important point. How can we as ESPON program contributors inform these policy processes? How do we become aware? We know that we're in a context of extensive uncertainty. We do not simply know what is coming in the years, what will we need. We have enormous knowledge gaps on what is there, where are the biodiversity issues really, how do we deal with them, what resources, what type of resources do we have, mining, energy, what technologies are coming up. So many elements we do not know, so we need to, or policymakers need to come up with collaboratively with reasonable solutions, reasonable sharing of burden facing this extensive uncertainty. And we then should be, ideally, in a position to inform these discussions, saying, okay, you come up with these solutions, I have these and these types of data, types of analysis to help you, okay, give some kind of helping build an informed position in relationship to these choices. I don't know if you see already, you've been working on specific macro-regional strategy, if you see the starting point for this interface between policymakers, communities, needs, and us as researchers coming up, do you see a perspective for how applied research on territorial development could be further developed? Tobias, if you can.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I would like to respond as part of a targeted analysis, because there you have the other way around, where really the policy has formulated the question in the beginning, and then it's the analytical part to contribute, to help, to reflect. So it's not so much as in fundamental research where you live in the ivory tower and then just have fancy ideas, but it's a transdisciplinary approach. And from my perspective, this is really really a strong point from the ESPON project, that it's a real interaction between stakeholders and the analytical part. And I think in our Interalp project, it was a lot about visualization, because many stakeholders, they knew about it. It's it's difficult, it's different, it's specific, but seeing it on maps with these clear colors makes a difference. And I mean, ESPON is not a mapping program, but all the mappings, they do make a difference. This is the first point. And the second point is really having this comparative perspective. I mean, the people from Grenoble, they know much more about their interface territory than we do, and you can go across all the interface territories. But having the whole picture across the Alpine Arc, that can help saying, okay, we are not alone, but there are some really comparable perspectives. That does help. And then thirdly, you have a structured process. I mean, it's not this policy rhythm that sometimes is ad hoc or just reacting, but it's saying, okay, we have a process with reporting, with dissemination things that helps also to have an agenda setting, which maybe was one of the more important points in my project or in our project.
Would what you say, would that imply that a possible future development would be to have a real type of benchmarking interface where you look at what is going on in these? You saw Torino has been doing a lot. Now maybe Grenoble wants to compare to Torino. They should have a place to go to follow up what is happening, and then you have all the others that are maybe less not come quite as far in their reflections on the interface territory approaches.
I mean, of course, I would say, well, firstly, the interest and the feedback from the policy side was quite positive in this project. So I expect that there will be processes going on. And of course, it would be a project idea to have a group of the willing interface territories to exchange and to do things together. This is nothing that I have planned from a top-down or structured approach. I'm just curious to see what will happen there. But normally in European territorial development, that's how it goes. You have a new pattern, a new topic emerging, and then those who are interested, that are advanced, they exchange experience about it, that maybe test things about it, and that cooperate then. I think the potential is large here.
Excellent. We have a question on the new program architecture. This is maybe more a question for our next speakers, but I think already now you're touching on things. Maybe evidence can be a starting point. This, what you're talking about, having this full scale, is actually maybe not quite a program, but it's definitely a very big project. So it's a very big endeavor to have an effective dialogue format for all these territories. Katarzyna, on the same question then of how do you see the starting point for a really informed applied research, informed by what goes on in these small areas you mentioned, informed by policy processes at national level. You talked about centralized resilience, so different policy levels. What's your take on that?
I think, again, the participatory process that is embedded into research is very important. And just making the stakeholders and decision makers aware that they are not alone is maybe not half of the job done, but it's building awareness. And I think what is important is to really not provide solution where one size fits all, but really encourage using knowledge to develop tailor-made solutions for particular territories. Of course, we might, and this is what we also used in our project, we might provide a typology of these specific territories, of these new geographies that do facing challenges. But then I think at the planning level, where do we build? There is a big, the biggest issue and like the biggest keyword, or one of the biggest keywords, except for the environmental protection in our project, was Via Carpatia, right? So this singular project is very much welcome and contested by different stakeholders because it links Poland, which is growing dynamically, needs a lot of people on the labor market, and another big economy which has very big domestic potential of Romania, but then it transits Hungary and Slovakia. And these two larger economies and larger populations will possibly collaborate together because Polish and Romanian economies are very, I would say, yeah, it could be interconnected very well, but what is the profit of Slovakian and Hungarian regions that will just face transit, right? They also need to have some kind of added value. Like you said, localities need to participate in the growth generated by the overall strategy. So how do we do it? Can we maybe introduce cooperatives? But then again, how they work out with the national law? Can we maybe organize some strategic alliances that are maybe less formal? Maybe we can introduce an economic format. Maybe we can introduce an economic network or an industry board. I think these are the solutions that could be driven both by governance or political science related research, but also by the local players, including then companies, including NGOs, not only the local authorities, but including social and economical players. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you're touching on many of the complexities of macro-regional cooperation. We want critical mass, we want visibility. At the same time, there is a need for tailor-made solution. Where do you find a balance? How can you combine those? You need to then bring together countries with different interests. Then maybe the evidence needed is to monitor where are the benefits, how is the economic, the social benefit spread, and that's a starting point for discussion then. Is it fair, not fair? Not for us to judge, but at least for policymakers to know, and then getting robust evidence on what are the economic dynamics and how is that, what are the diffusion effects, how is that organized. So I think what you're saying is framing quite well how we can think the production of evidence to inform these policies. Alexandra, I finish then with you on the same topic of allowing us as applied researchers to inform concrete policy processes at different levels, from the local up to national or transnational. Do you see the starting point? Is it already, are the structures there? Do they need to be fine-tuned for us to be able to really help?
Well, I will divide the question in two topics. I would start with the need for evidence. This is even more pressing now than in the past, for two simple reasons. Usually we are, in our analysis, myopic, in the sense that we have a difficulty in seeing the trend that is coming by. And I'll give you an example. You meet a friend every day, you cannot see that he's becoming fatter or older. You see him 5 years after, and you can see the difference. So sometimes we need to be confronted with the reality, because we are so entangled with our own ecosystem that we don't see that the world is changing. And this is why evidence is important, because evidence is factual, it's cruel, it's that, and adds transparency and reality to the analysis between the dream or the political dream or the endeavor and what is happening. And this is why when you look at strategies are very beautiful, but we are still in development traps in many places. So this is the first topic. The second issue relates to institutions. If they have already this level to actually participate in this process. And I fear that most of them don't have. Not that they don't have the skills, but the fact that they don't have the commitment and the mandate to actively participate in this. And they are so pressured by their everyday business that they don't have time to anticipate and prepare the future. We are reactive by nature in terms of organizational and political landscape. And because we are reactive, it's very hard to integrate information that most of you have been producing for many years and actually making it happen in the territory. And I think that these two realities add to a complexity or an added complexity governance framework, where we need, as Katarzyna was saying, we need to mobilize everybody, but to mobilize we need to build trust, we need to have the data to show people, look, I'm older, but you are also older. So it doesn't matter if I'm dying because you will die as well. So we need to find a solution together. And this solution is actually much more multidimensional and composite than we think. Our problems have become increasingly complex, which means that the answer needs to be more complex as well and more complete. And when we look at the institutional framework, not only the issue of the polycentric governance, but also in terms of the capacities of these institutions to listen and to mobilize stakeholders is actually very important. And unfortunately, look at the divide that exists between society and political level, because this divide is very visible in many countries. So if there is a divide, somehow people and the actors, they become independent players in a game set that we are all supposed to participate. And so it's everyone for themselves. And this, in the end, does not work. It's badly played for everybody. Because of this divide, we have failed as policymakers to mobilize stakeholders, but also to make them accountable, because when we fail, everybody is failing. When institutions are failing, the society is failing. It's not just the guy running the institution or the prime minister. Everybody is failing. And so we need to realize that we're all on the same boat, which is a very Atlantical language. We're all on the same boat. And either we start working together and find ways of coordinating, or we are going nowhere. And finally, navigation language gives you a very interesting perspective on this. This is like rowing a boat. If the guy on the left is not coordinated with the guy on the right, you are always on the same place. And this is what's happening to Europe, across Europe. And this is what new geographies, new ways of thinking are necessary. We need to evolve in the way we do policy. We need to evolve in the way we implement policy. We need to evolve in the way we instigate broad participation of everybody. This is a challenge for all of us. This is our collective mission as a whole. And this collective mission has lots of larger macro-regional mission, but also shared local agendas where we need to make people believe that the European model is the model to go, and it will be together in this collective construction where collective intelligence that is provided by this data is quite relevant. It is in this collective ensemble that we can actually redesign our future.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, for reframing discussions in this way, bringing back trust, bringing back collective action to the core. And this is also something we can contribute with, emphasizing the good practices, showing what works, sharing these practices, and showing then how the macro-regional level can be a vector of dissemination of these, of diffusion of what works, and how you reestablish trust, how you refine the notion of where are public policies needed, how do they best add up to what is happening in societies, in the business environment, and then fine-tuning the policy responses. So you added a very nice rounding to all this discussion, so thank you very much for that. I think we will take a technical break now for a few minutes, so until 11:45, and then we come back with a discussion with our stakeholders, so we get the other perspective from the more policy-making side on their take. They have been listening to discussions so far, so they will maybe have reflections immediately on what we've been saying now from a research perspective. Thank you very much to all of you for your precious inputs. I thought this discussion was very productive in terms of bringing clarity on notions, on what importance, on how these things are interlinked. I hope the audience also found so. Please don't hesitate now during the break also to share your reflections on what you've heard so far. Was it clear? Do you need other things? Should we get back to some aspects? Or do you have general reflections on what was said? The Slido is there for you, so please use it to express yourselves. And so for the time being, thank you very much. And we see each other in 45 minutes to the rest of the audience. Thank you.